Hello everyone, I'm Akshat Patel. So this is going to be a follow-up tutorial to the two-part tutorial series on working with the UI table views. So due to many requests from the readers, this is going to be a follow-up on the tutorial. So we are going to learn how to implement a UI navigation controller, which helps you move from one table view to the another one. So let's begin. So let's have a bit of overview. The UI Navigation Controller class manages the navigation of hierarchy of content. So you can distribute the data in various levels so that you can have track of it. The UI Navigation Controller helps manage the content and present it more efficiently. The UI Navigation Controller holds an instance of a UI navigation bar, which is the blue bar on the top, and a UI bar button. So this is the button match which says back, which is on the left side in the UI navigation bar, which takes you back to the previous view. And the data is managed using a navigation stack. We'll go over it in a while. Okay, so here's a typical UI navigation controller. This screenshot is taken from the settings application from Apple. So as you can see, there's the light blue UI navigation bar which holds the title, and the UI bar button which says the back button. So this button takes you to the view which was previously on the stack before it, and if I tap on any of the rows or the table view rows, it takes me to the next view controller. So navigation stack, here's how it looks. Here's the setting application. So the main screen which appears when we first launch the setting applications in the iPhone simulator, you get the three options: general, safari, and photos. So if you tap on general, it takes you to the second view controller which gets added on the top of the stack. Remember, the view controller that's on the top of the stack is visible to the user. And if I tap on about once again, it takes me to the about view controller. So right now, as of the about screen, the about controller is on the top of the stack, the general controller is in the middle of the stack, and the root view controller always remains at the bottom of the stack. So that was a brief overview of UI navigation controller. So let's begin coding. So let me quit this. And since we didn't have enough time, I have already created a starting project so that we can begin quickly. So let me launch the project in Xcode and close this. Okay, so here's Xcode, and let me open up a few folders. So as you can see, I have opened the classes folder, and under the resources you can find a folder named images. Now this is the folder which contains our table view images, like in the previous tutorial, which we are going to use for the table view rows. Here's and here's the banner. So this is a new one. So these are the images which we are going to use in the DetailViewController, the controller which gets added to the stack when we tap a row in our root view controller. So these are the images that are going to be displayed in the next controller. Here's the icon for our application and a default.png. So that's in the images folder, and nothing more special. And one more file over here, descriptions.plist. So this file contains string short descriptions. So a plist file can be any type of thing, an array, a dictionary. Usually it's a dictionary or an array. In our case it's going to be an array, and it contains 7 items. Each item is a string, and these are short descriptions of each website that we are going to show in our project. So just make sure you know that there's a file for that. Now we don't have any, I haven't made any change in the code for our app delegates. And let me quickly open up our view controller. So in the view controller, as you can see, our view controller is a delegate and the data source for our table view. Now I have declared an instance of our table view and 4 arrays: sites list, images list, description array or desk array, and the banner images. Now, as you can see, the sites list array will hold the titles for our sites. The images array is going to hold the icons for our sites, holds the icons for these sites. And our desk array is going to be used in our DetailViewController, the controller that's going to be open next. So is gonna be the banner images array. So we don't use these two arrays until the next view controller. We just initialize them so that we can have the data ready when we load our new view controller. And here are the properties for those instance variables, with the exception of UI table view, which is an IB outlet. Let's save this and let's switch to the implementation. And as you can see, I synthesize all the variables over here, and I set all the variables to nil and ViewDidLoad and release them in the dialog method. Also remember that I have included the beginning project in the source code so that you can begin with me and have a track of what you're doing. So here are our view methods. ViewDidLoad. So here's where we initialize our 4 arrays. Here where we initialize the titles, which is going to be an array with strings, and here are the names of the sites from Envato. We set the dummy array equal to the main array and release the dummy array. Now for the image, the same procedure is gonna be used for our images. Here we create the UI image objects for each of the PNG files. Then we create an array, which is going to be a dummy array, which contains all the UI images, and the same as the previous array, we set it equal to the main array and release it. And the same procedure goes for our banner array, the banners, which contains the banner images. So it's going to be the same. And here's something a little bit different. When we load the description array, which is loaded from our descriptions.plist file, let me go to the implementation, and as you can see, I get a file path. So since we want to load our data from the file, we need to get the path to the file. So we create a string file path, you can call it anything you want, and then we call for the ns bundle main bundle. So this is the bundle which represents our resources or any of your files in the project. And then we call the method for path for resource. You pass in the name, I misspelled it, okay. You pass in the name for file, and you don't type the extension, and for of type you pass in an ns string which holds the extension. Make sure that you don't add the dot. You don't need to, you just need to tap in the extension, that's it. So we begin an array with contents of file. The method is, so when we allocate our desk array, we init with contents of file, and it requires us to pass in a file path in a form of a string. In our case, it's going to be the string file path. Now that we have our array, we release the dummy array and set the dummy array equal to the main array. So here we initialize all the 4 arrays. That's ViewDidLoad. Here's our next method, should_rotate to auto-rotate to interface orientation. We support all the orientations except for the upside down. And here are data source methods. We return the number of sections 1. We return the number of rows equal to the objects in the sites list array, which is right over here. And we create a cell for each row. We have a cell identifier, which is an ns string, and we use lazy loading. So whenever a cell is available which has scrolled off screen, we use the cell with the same identifier instead of allocating a new one, and if we don't have any more cells, we allocate a new one with the UI table view cell style of default, and we auto release it. Now we need to configure the cell, which we're going to do in a while, and here's where we return our cell. Now let's quickly configure our cell. So we want the text label of the cell equal to the object in the sites list array, which is at the index of index path dot row. That's the current row. We also want to set the image view and set its image property equal to the object that's in the images list at the index path of row. Now we also want to set an accessory view or accessory state type, and it's going to be UI table view cell accessory disclosure indicator. Now that should do it for configuring our cell. And remember, the default height for the cell is 44. Now since we have a little bit bigger images, I have set it equal to 50. I have a title for the footer and Envato incorporated, and I haven't implemented the method when what happens when a user taps on the row. So in our case, we want to use the UI navigation controller for that, but let's make sure that we have our project up and running. So let me build and run. Here's the iPhone simulator. It's taking a while. Okay, here we go. So here we have our seven UI table view rows with their titles and their images and the accessory views. So if I tap on that, nothing happens right now. So we need to quit this and quickly implement our UI navigation controller. So let's begin. Okay, so you want to go to the AppDelegate, and here's where we are going to declare our UI navigation controller. Let's call it navigation controller. Now we need to set it as an IB outlet, just like the window, and paste that, and we have the property set. Now we need to synthesize our navigation controller. Don't forget to release it when the DLOC method is called. Okay, so we have our navigation controller ready. Now what we need to do is implement it. So let's click main-window.nib or XIB, and this should launch interface builder. Okay, here we go. So here's our window, which is open right now, but we don't need it, so we're gonna close it. Now scroll through library to search for the navigation controller, or if you're unable to find one, just type navigation in the search box. Now drag the navigation controller from the library into the document window and drop it beneath the window, and you should see a new screen pop up which says navigation controller on the top, and it should say root view controller in the title. So this is going to be our navigation controller. Now remember that we made an IB outlet for UI navigation controller in the AppDelegate. Okay, here we go. So control click on the Mac and drag from the outlet for navigation controller onto the navigation controller in the window or onto the item in the document window. You can do either way. So there's our navigation controller. So if you hover over the connection, the window should highlight. Okay, so that shows that our navigation controller is connected. Now as you can see, it just says plain view. It doesn't load our view from anywhere. So if you click on the disclosure triangle next to our navigation controller, it should show us two children, a UI navigation bar and a view controller. So we need to set the class of the view controller to our Envato view controller so that the view is loaded from our Envato view controller file. So that's the basic setup. Now let's rename the title and call it Envato and save it. So that's it for the interface builder. Let's quit it and let's begin by launching our project. So click build and run. Okay, so here's the iPhone simulator, and as you can see, we don't have our UI navigation bar over here. Now you might be wondering, we did everything from declaring the instance variable to connecting it in the interface builder. So why didn't the UI navigation controller launch? Well, there's a reason behind it. Let me stop the project and let's go to the implementation for our AppDelegate. And you need to find the method did finish launching with options. Now inside the method you can see that there are two methods, two methods: window add subview, viewController.view, and window make key invisible. So the one which we're interested in is add subview. Now as you can see, our window is loading its subview from the view controller, directly from the view controller, instead of our navigation controller which has the UI navigation bar. So delete view controller and we need to type in navigationcontroller.view. So save this and let's build and run again. There we go. So there's our UI navigation bar with the title for Envato, and here's our table view. Now all we need to implement is our detail view, which is gonna open after we tap on any of the rows, and that's it. So let's quit this and let's begin by creating our detail view controller, the controller that's going to open when we tap on the row. So let me click new and go to iPhone OS Cocoa Touch class and select the tab image icon that says UIViewController subclass. Now make sure you check with XIB user interface and none of the other options should be checked. So click next and let's name it DetailViewController.m, and also make sure that you check also create DetailViewController.h. Now everything seems alright, so let's click finish. So now you should have 3 new files in your project. Let me resize this: DetailViewController.h.aim and our user interface file. So just for organization purposes, let's bring our nib file into the resources folder. So now we have our 2 files. So let's quickly launch our DetailViewController in interface builder. Okay, so here is our view. Now we need to make sure that our view knows that there's going to be a navigation bar at the top. So if you click on the white background and go to the first tab, the view attributes tab in the inspector, you can see there's an option for top bar in the simulated user interface elements. So click on the drop down and choose navigation bar. So it's not adding a new navigation bar, but it's just gonna simulate that there's going to be a UI navigation bar so that you can lay out your user interface more efficiently instead of resizing it when the navigation bar appears. So now we need to drop an UI image view. Now it might take up the whole space, so let me just resize this. Now we want to make sure that we follow the human interface guidelines, so make sure you follow these blue dotted guidelines that help you to keep spacing appropriate. Now click the UI image view and go to the third tab, the image view size tab, and we wanna stretch this from the end to end and make sure the height for the image view is 154. So the size that should be in the width and the height should be 280 by 154. So that's our image view. And now we need a text view that's going to hold the information for our description. So resize that and make sure it goes all the way down till the bottom. So that's our user interface. Now don't just quit the interface builder yet. Switch back to Xcode and we need to declare the IB outlets for our image view and the text view. So let's call UI image view. Let's call it image view, and we also need the UI text view, and it's going to be text view. Now our UI image view needs an image and our UI text view needs a string to represent the information. So we need to create a UI image. Let's call it banner, and our text view needs an and a string. Let's call it description. Now let me copy all four of them, and we need to set the properties for those four. So @property, and it's non-atomic, retain, and it's an IB outlets. So let's copy that and paste it. Now remember that our NS string and UI image are not IB outlets, so they are just gonna be non-atomic retain, and that's it. Okay, so there are four properties, and now we need to synthesize. So pragma mark synthesizers. So we need to synthesize our four variables. The first one was image view, the second one was text view, our UI image view was known as banner, and our NS string was called description. Now we don't need many of these methods, so let me just delete those and view methods. Okay, we need ViewDidLoad, and we are going to support all the orientations except for UI portrait upside down. So make sure this equal to becomes an exclamation mark, and let's not forget memory management. So memory management, and we just want to log it into our console if we have any memory warnings. So memory warning, and I don't need those two lines. Okay, and in ViewDidLoad we want to set our variables to nil. So self.imageView becomes nil, self.textView becomes nil, self.banner is nil, and also description is nil. Now make sure you release those variables. So imageView release, textView release, banner release, and also our description is going to be released. Now the only method that we need to implement is the ViewDidLoad. So here's what we are going to do. We are going to set our image view property, the image property for our image view. So imageview.image equal to the banner. So we are going to provide our view controller with an image which is going to be set equal to banner, which in turn when the view is loaded will set the image property for the image view. And the same goes for our text view. We set it text property equal to description, and that should be it. So let's go to our interface builder and connect our IB outlets. So image view goes to the image view and text view goes to the text view. So save this and quit. So now let's launch our application. So we have our table view, but when I tap, the detail view controller is not loaded. That's because we haven't implemented the logic behind it. So let's stop the project and let's declare a variable. So we need to class our DetailViewController, and so now we need to declare an instance of our DetailViewController. Let's call it child controller because that's what's gonna be. So, and the property for it, so property non-atomic retain and DetailViewController child controller. Now switch to the implementation, synthesize it, child controller. Now make sure that you import two documents. So click on the line that says import Envato view controller and press enter and type in import. Now we want our AppDelegate because that's what holds our UINavigationController variable, and we want our DetailViewController.h because that's what we are going to load in. So we need to set our child controller to null and release it. So child controller release. Okay, so here's where we implement our logic for the UINavigationController. So let me delete that and let's begin. So we need to get hold of our AppDelegate in a way. So let's call Envato AppDelegate, and the variable is going to be called delegate, and let me type in something and I'll explain what it is. So Envato AppDelegate, and this is what goes in parentheses. So this is what's going to tell the compiler that the variable that's going to be created needs to be of type Envato AppDelegate. It cannot be anything else. So now we call for our UI application superclass, and we call the method shared application. So what this essentially does is that it calls our own application, and we want to call the delegate for our application, and that's what gives us a delegate. So now we need to call our DetailViewController, and just like how we initialized our arrays, we need a dummy view controller so that we can feed it with data and set our main view controller, that's the child view controller, equal to it. So let's call it DetailVC, and we are going to allocate it DetailViewController, and we want to call the method init with nib name. So this is what inits our view controller with the nib file. In our case, since we already made one, DetailViewController. Now make sure you don't add the extension .xib because it already knows it's a nib file, and for bundle you set it equal to nil. So closing bracket and save it. So now we need to feed our dummy DetailViewController with its banner. We need to set an UI image for that, and also we need to set its description equal to something. So just like how we configured our cells over here, we need to call the method for object at index. So remember, we created our array banner images which contains the images for our DetailViewController, and we need to get the objects that's at the index of indexPath.row, and the same goes for our description. So let's call desk array and object at indexPath.row. So now this what basically does is that our DetailViewController has its banner image, which is going to be loaded in the UI image view, and it has the ANA-string description, which is going to be loaded in the UI text view when the DetailViewController is loaded. So now what we need to do is set our self-child controller equal to our DetailViewController, and here's where a single method comes into play from navigation controller. So we call our delegate, which we created over here, and we call for its variable navigation controller. Now a UI navigation controller has a method push view controller. It requires an UI view controller and animated. And let's pass in our view controller. So child controller, and yes, we want it to be animated. And this is what essentially push is in a new controller. Now we don't need our detail VC, which is our dummy controller, so we can release it, save this, and let's build and run. So there we go. So there's our UI navigation bar with our table view. Now if I tap on App Store, it takes me to the DetailViewController, and it loads the banner image and also loads the text from our descriptions. So there we go. There we have a working UI navigation controller. Now let's make some tweaks. So as you can see, if I tap on Creatica, you can see there's nothing in here. So we need to give the DetailViewController a title. So let's quit this, and all we need to do is set the DetailViewControllers, the dummy controllers title property equal to the sites list, the object that's at the index of index path, that row in the sites list. So this is going to be the name of the site. So let's launch once more. So now if I tap on AppStorm, you can see it says AppStorm on the top. So there we have it working. Now the final thing that we need to do is, as you can see, if I go back to the previous view controller, our row is still highlighted. We don't want that to happen. So stop the project, and the final tweak to this project is we want to deselect the, now we call the table view, and we call the method deselect row at index path. We pass in the index path, which is already over here in the method, and yes, we want it to be animated. Now end it with a semicolon, save, and let's finally build our project. There we go. So when I tap on a row, it takes me to the detail view controller with its respective banner image and its description. So if I click on Rockable Press or Tuts Plus, any of the sites. So here we have our working UI navigation controller, and as you can see, the highlight goes away when we go back to our view controller. So that should be it for our UI navigation controller tutorial. Thanks for watching.